Emotional safety is one of the most underestimated forces in human connection, yet it is the foundation of deep emotional attachment, especially for men. From an early age, many men are conditioned, directly or indirectly, to suppress emotions, to appear strong, controlled, and unaffected. Vulnerability is often associated with weakness, and emotional expression is discouraged or mocked. As a result, many men grow into adulthood carrying unspoken fears, unresolved insecurities, and emotional pressure that rarely finds a safe place to land. When a woman creates an environment where these emotions are not only allowed but accepted, something profound happens at the psychological level. The mind begins to relax, defenses slowly come down. For the first time, he does not feel the need to perform, impress, or protect an image. He simply exists, and that feeling is incredibly powerful. Emotional safety begins with non-judgmental listening. This does not mean offering constant advice or solutions, but rather allowing space for expression without interruption, correction, or dismissal. When a man speaks about his frustrations, fears, failures, or doubts, and is met with calm attention instead of criticism, his nervous system registers relief. The brain interprets this as safety. Over time, this repeated experience conditions his mind to associate emotional comfort with that specific person. In psychological terms, this creates a secure emotional anchor. He may not consciously realize it, but his brain starts to link peace, relief, and acceptance to her presence. That association alone can be enough to form emotional dependence. Validation plays a crucial role here. Validation does not mean agreeing with everything he says. It means acknowledging his emotional experience as real and understandable. When his feelings are recognized rather than minimized, he feels seen. Being seen is not about being admired, it is about being understood. This is rare for many men, and rarity amplifies emotional value. When someone consistently validates his inner world, he begins to trust not only that person but the emotional experience itself. He becomes more willing to open up again, to go deeper, to reveal parts of himself he normally hides. Each layer of vulnerability shared strengthens the emotional bond, making detachment increasingly difficult. Another powerful element of emotional safety is emotional consistency. When responses are predictable in a calm and stable way, the brain feels secure. Sudden emotional volatility, extreme reactions, or unpredictable judgment trigger anxiety and self-protection. But when a man knows that he can express himself without triggering chaos, ridicule, or emotional punishment, his mind relaxes. Over time, this consistency trains his emotional system to lower its guard automatically in that person's presence. The result is a deep sense of comfort that feels almost addictive. Comfort, when paired with emotional openness, creates attachment that logic alone cannot undo. Silence is also an underrated component of emotional safety. The ability to sit in silence without tension, pressure, or expectation sends a powerful psychological message. You don't have to perform to be accepted. For men who often feel valued for what they do rather than who they are, this is profoundly disarming. Silence shared without discomfort creates intimacy at a subconscious level. It tells the brain that presence alone is enough. Over time, this presence becomes emotionally grounding, something the mind seeks when stressed or overwhelmed. Emotional safety also involves emotional protection. This means not using vulnerabilities as weapons later, not mocking past confessions, and not exposing private emotional information to others. When a man realizes that what he shares is protected rather than exploited, trust deepens exponentially. Trust is not built through grand gestures, it is built through repeated proof that vulnerability will not be punished. Once this trust is established, emotional attachment accelerates rapidly. The mind begins to rely on that safe emotional container, and reliance slowly turns into emotional dependence. It is important to understand that emotional safety does not feel exciting at first. In fact, to some, it may even feel boring compared to chaos or emotional drama. But the human brain is wired to seek regulation. Once emotional safety is experienced consistently, the nervous system prefers it over instability. For men who have lived with emotional tension or suppression for years, this safety feels like relief from a constant internal pressure. Relief is one of the strongest reinforcers of attachment. The brain remembers what reduces pain more vividly than what creates pleasure. Over time, emotional safety reshapes self-perception. When a man is accepted in moments of weakness, he begins to accept himself more. That self-acceptance becomes psychologically linked to the person who provided the safe space. This creates a subtle but powerful emotional loop. Being with her feels like being at peace with himself. Leaving that environment would mean returning to emotional tension, suppression, or isolation. The mind naturally resists that loss, strengthening emotional attachment even further. Another layer of emotional safety is emotional patience. Allowing someone to process feelings at their own pace without pressure to fix or move on communicates respect for their inner experience. Many men are rarely given time to emotionally process. They are expected to be functional and resilient at all times. When patience replaces pressure, emotional trust deepens. He begins to believe that his emotional rhythms are acceptable. This belief creates emotional loyalty not because he is controlled, but because he feels valued at a human level. Emotional safety also creates a mirror effect. When a man feels safe expressing emotions, he often becomes more emotionally available in return. The relationship shifts from surface-level interaction to emotional reciprocity. This mutual vulnerability strengthens the bond, but the initial provider of safety remains psychologically significant. The brain remembers who made it possible. That memory carries emotional weight, even in moments of distance or conflict. Importantly, emotional safety does not mean emotional dependence is healthy by default. It simply explains why attachment forms so strongly. The power lies in awareness. When emotional safety is offered consistently and authentically, it becomes a foundation for trust, intimacy, and long-term bonding. When it is offered selectively or withdrawn unpredictably, it can create anxiety-based attachment. The mind clings to what once provided relief. This is why emotional safety must be handled responsibly. It is a psychological force that shapes behavior, desire, and loyalty at a deep level. As time passes, emotional safety evolves into emotional home. The person becomes a place rather than just a presence, a psychological refuge where defenses are lowered and authenticity is allowed. Once someone becomes home to the nervous system, separation feels destabilizing. The emotional attachment is no longer about attraction alone. It is about regulation, identity, and emotional survival. This is why emotional safety is not loud or dramatic, yet it is one of the strongest forces in human bonding. In the end, emotional safety works because it speaks to a fundamental human need, to be accepted without performance. For men who are often valued for strength, success, or control, being valued for emotional truth is transformative. It rewires how connection is experienced. The bond that forms is not based on fear, excitement, or validation alone. It is based on peace. And peace, once felt deeply, becomes something the mind does not easily let go of. Selective availability is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in emotional attachment because it is often confused with coldness, manipulation, or emotional games. In reality, its power lies not in withdrawal, but in balance. Human psychology places higher value on what is meaningful but not guaranteed. When emotional access is constant, unlimited, and predictable, the brain adapts quickly and stops assigning significance to it. But when presence is intentional rather than automatic, the mind stays engaged. It pays attention. It invests. This is not about ignoring someone, it is about allowing space for desire, curiosity, and emotional movement to exist naturally. From a psychological standpoint, the human brain is wired to seek completion. When something feels unfinished or partially available, the mind continues to think about it. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect, where incomplete experiences occupy more mental space than completed ones. Selective availability activates this effect emotionally. When a woman is warm, engaging, emotionally present, but not always immediately accessible, the interaction remains mentally open-ended. The man's mind continues processing the connection even in her absence. This continued mental engagement is a key ingredient in emotional attachment. Constant access creates emotional saturation. When someone is always available, always responsive, always emotionally present, the brain stops anticipating. There is nothing to wonder about, nothing to miss, nothing to pursue. Emotional desire weakens not because the connection is bad, but because it is overwhelmed. Selective availability prevents this saturation by allowing emotional pauses. These pauses give the nervous system time to register value. Absence, when combined with positive emotional experiences, intensifies emotional memory. The brain replays interactions, emotions, and moments, strengthening attachment during the gap rather than weakening it. Independence is the foundation of selective availability. When a woman has a full emotional life, goals, interests, routines, passions, the connection does not feel like her only source of meaning. This independence signals psychological stability and self-worth. The brain is naturally drawn to individuals who do not emotionally collapse without external validation. Independence communicates, "My presence is a choice, not a need." This distinction changes the emotional dynamic entirely. A choice feels valuable. A need feels burdensome. Emotional attachment grows stronger when someone feels chosen rather than relied upon. Selective availability also prevents emotional overexposure. Emotional intimacy is powerful, but when shared too quickly or too constantly, it loses depth. Emotional pacing allows intimacy to unfold gradually, giving each layer of connection time to settle and integrate. When emotions are revealed in stages, the bond feels earned rather than given away. The brain respects what it works for. Effort increases perceived value. When emotional access is not instant, the mind invests more energy, attention, and emotional significance into each interaction. There is also a neurological component to selective availability. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation and pursuit, is released most strongly when rewards are anticipated rather than received. If emotional connection is always available, dopamine release decreases. But when connection is meaningful yet intermittent, dopamine remains active. This creates a subtle emotional craving, not for chaos, but for continuation. The desire to reconnect becomes emotionally charged, reinforcing attachment at a chemical level. Importantly, selective availability is not emotional punishment. It is not disappearing to provoke anxiety or withholding affection to control behavior. Those patterns create insecurity, not healthy attachment. True selective availability is rooted in self-respect and boundaries. It means responding with intention, not obligation. It means making space for life outside the connection while remaining emotionally genuine when present. The difference is subtle but powerful. One creates attraction through stability, the other creates anxiety through unpredictability. Boundaries play a central role in this dynamic. Boundaries communicate self-worth. When emotional access is unlimited, boundaries are blurred. When boundaries exist, emotional interactions feel structured and safe. The brain interprets boundaries as a sign of emotional maturity. This maturity increases trust and respect, which are essential components of long-term attachment. A connection without boundaries may feel intense, but it often lacks sustainability. Selective availability preserves emotional energy, allowing the bond to deepen without burning out. Another psychological effect of selective availability is emotional reflection. When space exists between interactions, individuals are forced to reflect on how they feel. This reflection solidifies emotional awareness. In constant interaction, emotions are experienced but not processed. In space, emotions are processed, named, and internalized. A man may not realize how emotionally invested he is until the interaction pauses. That realization often happens in absence, not presence. He notices the missing emotional input, the silence, the shift, and in that noticing, attachment becomes conscious. Selective availability also reinforces identity-based attraction. When someone maintains their individuality, they remain a separate emotional entity rather than merging completely into the connection. This separation is essential for desire. Desire requires distance, not emotional distance, but identity distance. When two people fully merge emotionally, desire often fades into familiarity. Selective availability preserves identity, allowing admiration and curiosity to remain alive. Consistency within selective availability is critical. Availability should be intentional, not erratic. Erratic behavior creates confusion and insecurity, while intentional availability creates anticipation. Anticipation is emotionally pleasurable. When interactions are positive, engaging, and emotionally rewarding, the brain looks forward to them. The time between becomes a buildup rather than a loss. This pattern strengthens emotional attachment because the brain associates the person with positive emotional peaks rather than constant emotional noise. Another important aspect is emotional self-regulation. Selective availability models healthy emotional regulation. It shows that emotions are not reactive, desperate, or overwhelming. This calm emotional rhythm feels grounding to the nervous system. Many people are unconsciously drawn to those who regulate emotions well because it creates psychological safety. When someone does not emotionally chase, over-explain, or over-pursue, it signals inner stability. Stability is deeply attractive at a subconscious level. Selective availability also changes the power dynamic of emotional choice. When emotional access is not automatic, it becomes a privilege rather than an expectation. Privileges are valued, expectations are taken for granted. This does not mean creating hierarchy or dominance, it means preserving emotional meaning. When presence feels earned through mutual respect and effort, emotional investment increases naturally. It is also important to understand that selective availability invites reciprocity. When one person does not overextend emotionally, the other is more likely to step forward. Emotional space invites participation. When everything is already given, there is nothing left to offer. Selective availability leaves room for pursuit, expression, and emotional contribution from both sides. This mutual participation strengthens attachment because both individuals feel involved in building the connection. Over time, selective availability prevents emotional exhaustion. Constant emotional availability can lead to burnout, resentment, or loss of self. When emotional energy is preserved, interactions remain fresh and authentic. Authenticity is key to emotional attachment. The brain responds strongly to genuine emotional presence. Forced or constant availability often leads to emotional numbness. Selective availability keeps emotional presence intentional and alive. At a deeper level, selective availability respects the natural rhythm of desire. Desire is not linear, it rises and falls. Allowing space respects this rhythm rather than forcing constant closeness. Forced closeness often triggers emotional resistance. Chosen closeness strengthens attachment. When emotional access feels voluntary, it feels meaningful. Selective availability also reinforces emotional confidence. When someone is comfortable being alone, comfortable with silence, and comfortable with space, it communicates inner security. Inner security is contagious. It stabilizes the emotional environment of the relationship. A man may not consciously analyze this, but his nervous system responds to it. He feels less pressure, less obligation, and more freedom, which paradoxically increases attachment rather than reducing it. Ultimately, selective availability works because it aligns with how the human mind assigns value. The mind values what feels meaningful, intentional, and earned. It resists what feels overwhelming, excessive, or guaranteed. When emotional presence is balanced with independence, connection remains dynamic rather than stagnant. Attachment grows not from fear of loss but from appreciation of presence. In its healthiest form, selective availability is simply emotional self-respect. It is knowing when to engage fully and when to step back into one's own life. It is choosing connection without abandoning individuality. When practiced authentically, it creates emotional depth rather than emotional tension. The attachment that forms is not based on anxiety or insecurity, but on desire, curiosity, and emotional resonance. In the end, selective availability is not about controlling someone else's emotions. It is about honoring your own emotional energy. And when emotional energy is honored, it naturally becomes valued by others. The strongest emotional bonds are formed not through constant proximity, but through meaningful presence combined with the freedom to miss, reflect, and desire. Identity reinforcement is one of the most profound and enduring drivers of emotional attachment, yet it is often overlooked in discussions about relationships. Men, like all humans, are deeply motivated by identity. Who they believe themselves to be, how they see their role in life, and how they perceive their value in the eyes of others are fundamental components of their self-concept. When someone interacts with a man in a way that reinforces his identity, acknowledging his strengths, validating his purpose, respecting his individuality, attachment moves beyond simple emotional or physical attraction. It becomes psychological. The bond forms not just with actions or moments, but with the essence of who he perceives himself to be. This kind of attachment is powerful, lasting, and often unconscious. It is why some men feel unable to detach from women who make them feel seen, understood, and respected at this deepest level. Identity reinforcement begins with acknowledgement. Every man has aspects of himself that he considers important, his achievements, his values, his principles, his passions. When a woman notices, praises, or supports these aspects, she communicates recognition. This recognition is different from superficial compliments. It is not simply saying, "You're smart" or "You're attractive." It is about noticing the effort, consistency, and unique qualities that make him who he is. For example, acknowledging the hours he dedicates to mastering a skill, or the integrity with which he treats others, signals that she understands his inner world. The brain registers this as a form of validation that aligns with his self-concept, creating emotional resonance and attachment. When repeated over time, this reinforcement becomes a psychological anchor, linking positive self-perception with her presence. Men are especially sensitive to reinforcement that aligns with their aspirational identity. Aspirational identity is the version of themselves they are striving to become, more competent, more respected, more capable. When a woman treats him as if he is already that version, she strengthens his self-image. This is not flattery. It is a subtle, psychologically potent form of support. The brain responds as if the aspirational identity is already realized. Neurologically, this creates dopamine spikes, feelings of pride, and emotional satisfaction. As a result, attachment deepens. He associates her presence with a sense of being fully recognized and elevated, which creates an almost addictive pull. Another critical component of identity reinforcement is emotional mirroring. When a woman reflects back a man's core values, principles, and intentions in a validating way, it amplifies his sense of self. Emotional mirroring is not imitation, it is recognition. For example, if he expresses a desire to help others or pursue a meaningful goal, responding with acknowledgement and support reinforces that this is who he is at his core. The brain interprets this as alignment between self-perception and external validation. This alignment produces comfort, pride, and attachment simultaneously. Men often remember vividly those who got them at their deepest level, and these memories create subconscious emotional dependence. Identity reinforcement also works through purpose alignment. Every man seeks significance, meaning beyond daily routines or survival. When a woman engages with him in ways that validate or enhance his purpose, attachment grows at a structural level. This might mean respecting his career ambitions, supporting his projects, or simply listening attentively to his ideas and strategies. When he experiences her as someone who values what he values, the brain associates her presence with purpose validation. This form of attachment is particularly strong because it connects emotional reward to existential meaning. It is no longer about comfort or attention alone, it is about feeling understood in the context of one's life mission. Emotional safety is intertwined with identity reinforcement. When men are able to express their fears, doubts, or insecurities without judgment, they receive a kind of identity feedback that is both supportive and empowering. They realize that their vulnerabilities do not negate their worth, they are seen as part of the whole person. This acceptance strengthens attachment because it communicates, implicitly, that you are enough as you are. Men often carry societal pressures that equate vulnerability with weakness. When a woman validates vulnerability while simultaneously reinforcing identity, she creates a profound psychological bond that is hard to replicate elsewhere. The reinforcement of identity also extends to moral and ethical dimensions. Men, like all humans, are deeply influenced by their own moral compass. When a woman acknowledges or affirms his values, whether they are integrity, loyalty, courage, or creativity, she strengthens the emotional circuitry that links attachment to self-worth. Conversely, neglecting or dismissing these aspects can weaken emotional connection, even if other factors, like physical attraction, remain. The brain inherently prioritizes alignment with identity over transient stimuli. When someone becomes associated with validation of core values, emotional attachment intensifies because it feels not only rewarding but fundamentally safe and meaningful. Identity reinforcement operates not just through overt praise, but also through subtle behaviors. Simple gestures like remembering important details about his life, acknowledging past accomplishments, or showing interest in his passions reinforce self-concept continuously. These micro-validations accumulate, creating a pattern of psychological reinforcement. Over time, his mind begins to associate emotional security, comfort, and validation with her presence. This is why identity reinforcement is often more powerful than physical attraction or superficial attention. It becomes a structural part of his emotional experience. Another crucial aspect is the consistency of reinforcement. Random or sporadic validation is much less effective than steady, authentic reinforcement. The brain seeks predictability and reliability in social interactions, especially when it comes to attachment. Consistent reinforcement allows men to feel seen, understood, and valued over time, solidifying psychological dependence. Inconsistent reinforcement, by contrast, can create confusion, insecurity, or emotional anxiety. Attachment may still form, but it is often driven by fear rather than alignment with identity. Reinforcement of identity also involves respecting autonomy while remaining emotionally present. Men attach deeply to those who do not seek to control or diminish their individuality, but rather enhance it. Supporting independence, acknowledging personal decisions, and encouraging growth are all forms of identity reinforcement. This demonstrates that attachment is not about ownership or possession, but about shared resonance. Men instinctively respond to this kind of reinforcement because it allows them to retain agency while still forming a deep emotional bond. Identity reinforcement often intertwines with narrative creation. Humans understand themselves through stories, the stories they tell themselves about who they are and who they aspire to be. A woman who reinforces these narratives, whether by participating in them, encouraging them, or reflecting them back, strengthens emotional attachment. The brain perceives alignment between self-story and social reinforcement as a form of existential validation. Attachment forms not only to the person, but to the narrative they co-create together. Psychologically, identity reinforcement is also linked to emotional investment. When men feel their identity is supported and elevated, they invest more deeply, emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. Investment is a reinforcing loop. The more a man invests in a relationship where his identity is acknowledged, the more attached he becomes. Conversely, lack of identity reinforcement reduces investment and attachment because interactions feel superficial or misaligned with self-concept. Another layer of identity reinforcement is recognition of effort, not just outcome. Men respond to acknowledgement of their persistence, resilience, and dedication. Praise for achievements alone is often less effective than praise for the process, the commitment and perseverance that define their identity. Recognizing effort communicates understanding of who they are at a core level, reinforcing attachment more deeply than transient rewards. Identity reinforcement also operates on a subconscious level. Often, men are not explicitly aware that attachment has strengthened because of identity alignment. They may feel drawn to a woman without fully understanding why. The psychological mechanisms of validation, recognition, and resonance operate below conscious thought. The brain prioritizes these signals over superficial attraction, creating deep-seated emotional bonds that are resistant to time, distance, or external interference. Finally, identity reinforcement fosters loyalty. When a man feels that someone consistently validates who he is at his core, the attachment becomes protective and enduring. He may go to great lengths to maintain the connection because it represents not just comfort, pleasure, or desire, but affirmation of his very self. In essence, reinforcing identity creates a bond that merges emotional gratification with psychological security. This combination is what transforms simple attraction into emotional addiction. The man becomes attached not only to the person, but to how he feels and perceives himself in relation to her. The attachment is layered, resilient, and profound, forming a connection that touches the deepest structures of human motivation and emotion.